from Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw God sitting on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. 2 they covered with their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory." The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and in the house filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraphs touched my mouth, and with it said, "Now this has touched your lips. Your guilt is departed, and your sin is blotted out." Then I heard the voice of God saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Well, the Bible is full of such weird and strange things. Like these words we just heard from the 6th chapter of Isaiah. There's smoke, and there's fire, and there's winged creatures. It's like something out of a science fiction novel. Emphasis on the fiction. And yet there is also something strangely familiar about it, at least for people who have been in or around the church. This Bible passage contains several things that you might kind of recognize, even if you don't really know why. But those words, holy, 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 we sang them this morning, complete with the cherubim and the seraphim references. And many times during communion, we might repeat words like them as well. Holy, 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 the whole earth is full of your glory. You might have recognized other words as Amy was reading too. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Here I am, Lord. Some people also point out that this text from Isaiah might actually be the origin of the pattern of worship that many Christian churches follow, including ours still today, with its elements of praise and confession and forgiveness and inspiration and sending forward. Now, we don't follow it exactly or even literally. I can imagine you might not be too in favor of me bringing charcoal briquettes to church to heat up to touch 2 people's lips after the prayer of confession. Suddenly, online church seems a lot safer, doesn't it? So, for all of its vague familiarity, this passage, it's still just so weird. Isaiah talks about being in the temple where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, for those of you who are not familiar with the Indiana Jones movies, is the ornate, gold-plated wooden chest that in biblical times housed the 2 tablets of the law given to Moses by God. And the ark rested in what they called the Holy of Holies inside the tabernacle of the ancient temple of Jerusalem, and was seen really only by the high priest of the Israelites on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which means that Isaiah probably wasn't actually even in there, because no one went in there. The ark was too powerful, too dangerous, too close to the presence of the holy God. So Isaiah imagines it or dreams it or somehow has this vision of being there, and the carvings kind of come to life, and the power of this ark creates an encounter for Isaiah with God. Now, even having seen Indiana Jones, I cannot relate to this at all. It belongs on a movie screen. But for Isaiah's listeners, those images and ideas matched what was in their imaginations too. And so it would have felt a little more possible. And these words come to them at a time when things were sort of collapsing around them. A long-serving king has just died, bringing about a real sense of political uncertainty. The previous chapters of Isaiah talk about a world that is full of doom and gloom, a world where God seems to be irrelevant to the lives of most of the people, where the practice of worship is futile, where greed has led to injustice, leadership is full of corruption. And when I hear that, I realize I can sort of relate to Isaiah's people after all. When I watch the news, especially this week, I can kind of feel like it's full of doom and gloom. I can feel like the people have given up on God, that greed and corruption are the order of the day. I can relate to this Isaiah who says, I'm at a loss. I'm surrounded by unclean lips, and I count myself in that company. If Isaiah thought he lived in a people of unclean lips, can you imagine what he would have thought of us? I think it is easy for us to agree that it's pretty much inconceivable to contend that a living God is present and speaking to us now. That's bananas. And despite all of this, despite all of that feeling in his world, Isaiah has an encounter with God. And despite all of this, I think that we too might be having encounters with God. Andrew Root is a Lutheran theologian, author, professor. A few years ago, I went to an event at Canadian Mennonite University, and he talked about his research when he went to people of all ages and stages and walks of life and asked them whether they thought they had ever had an experience of God, or whatever they were going to call God. And time after time after time, people would tell him stories. They would share with him something that maybe they'd never told anyone else, something they didn't talk about in regular life. And not because it involved God on thrones or winged seraphs, because they didn't, but they were things that were equally hard to explain in our cynical world. So people just didn't. And yet, experiencing something holy that they might describe as that made them trust, or at least wonder, whether in fact we could be part of a bigger story, a bigger reality, that there's something going on beyond just us in these moments. Experiences that help them look out at their world with surprise and wonder and awe. And Root said that we need to listen for those stories. We need to be open to those stories so that we can be open to having our own experiences and making our own stories. After all, if we refuse to listen for God, we're not going to hear God. If we deny our experiences, we're unlikely to offer an experience to someone else. And we will limit our capacity for wonder. And as Isaiah points out, we will limit our willingness to let God do with us what God can do. We don't trust that what we could do would make any difference, and so often we just don't. We convince ourselves that our not doing doesn't really matter. And so we hear Isaiah's story where he comes to understand that despite his failings and his frailties, he is called, he is chosen, he is gifted, he is sent. Now, it's convenient for us that we stopped reading after verse 8 today, because at this point we might feel a little inspired maybe. But then the next verses right after it contain what you might call the fine print, those things that no one tells you about when you sign up to do something. Oh, by the way, we didn't tell you that you also have to do this and this and this. Oh, by the way, this powerful, amazing deity who has called Isaiah to service tells him, oh, by the way, it won't actually work. The people aren't going to listen to you. The devastation's going to continue. So don't be looking for success. This is not about reaction. It's not about response. Oh, good. God just says, never mind that. Do it anyway. When I was thinking about that, it brought to mind two of my teachers who have now both died. One of my teachers was a man named Walter Hutton, who, when he was dying of cancer, said to me, you know, I used to be the kind of man who didn't believe in change. I thought the church should stay exactly as it is, as it was. In fact, there was a time, he said, when I fought really hard to keep things the way they'd always been. In my life, in my community, in my church. I wanted the things that had been good for me to be good for my children and their children. But, he said, I've been watching them, and what was good for me hasn't actually been that great for them. They need something different. So then he says, Julie, when it comes to the church, I think what we need to do is keep it alive. I don't know what that looks like or what shape that takes, and you're going to have to do it because I'm going to be gone, but we need to keep faith alive, burning like a coal, so to speak, so that it can light the fires that are ready to be lit. Because that's what my children and my grandchildren are going to need, a living faith. So that's our job, is to keep faith alive. I will never forget that conversation. I wonder now if he'd been reading Isaiah, where verse 13 says, the country may look like pine and oak forest with every tree cut down, every tree a stump, a huge field of stumps. But there is a holy seed in those stumps. The other teacher is someone I've never met, only knew of, is Dr. Maya Angelou, who said, just do right. Just do right. Right may not be expedient, it may not be profitable, but it will satisfy your soul. It brings you the protection, the kind of protection that bodyguards can't give you. So she says, try to live your life in a way that you will not regret years of useless virtue and inertia and timidity. The world around us is in great need at present. It is in deep need of some good people to do some good things. And many of us will be afraid to try. We will hesitate and we will doubt. And yet the prophet's voice in his strange world meets us in our strange world and wonders aloud, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Who indeed? Amen.